The diffuse spectacle accompanies the abundance of commodities, the undisturbed development of modern capitalism. Here, every individual commodity is justified in the name of the grandeur of the production of the totality of objects, of which the spectacle is an apologetic catalog. Irreconcilable claims crowd the stage of the affluent economy's unified spectacle. Different star commodities simultaneously support contradictory projects for provisioning society. The spectacle of automobiles demands a perfect transport network which destroys old cities, while the spectacle of the city itself requires museum areas. Therefore, the already problematic satisfaction which is supposed to come from the consumption of the whole is falsified immediately, since the actual consumer can directly touch only a succession of fragments of this commodity, happiness. Therefore, the already problematic satisfaction which is supposed to come from the consumption of the whole is falsified immediately, since the actual consumer can directly touch only a succession of fragments of this commodity, happiness, fragments in which the quality attributed to the whole is obviously missing every time. Every given commodity fights for itself, cannot acknowledge the others, and attempts to impose itself everywhere as if it were the only one. The spectacle, then, is the epic poem of this struggle, an epic which cannot be concluded by the fall of any Troy. The spectacle does not sing the praises of men and their weapons, but of commodities and their passions. In this blind struggle, every commodity, pursuing its passion, unconsciously realizes something higher, the becoming world of the commodity, which is also the becoming commodity of the world. Thus, by means of a ruse of commodity logic, what's specific in the commodity wears itself out in the fight, while the commodity form moves toward its absolute realization. The satisfaction which no longer comes from the use of abundant commodities is now sought in the recognition of their value as commodities. The use of commodities becomes sufficient unto itself. The consumer is filled with religious fervor for the sovereign liberty of the commodities. Waves of enthusiasm for a given product, supported and spread by all the media of communication, are thus propagated with lightning speed. A style of dress emerges from a film. A magazine promotes night spots which launch various clothing fads. Just when the mass of commodities slides toward puerility, the puerile itself becomes a special commodity. This is epitomized by the gadget. We can recognize a mystical abandon to the transcendence of the commodity in free gifts, such as keychains, which are not bought but are included by advertisers with prestigious purchases, or which flow by exchange in their own sphere. One who collects the keychains, which have been manufactured for collection, accumulates the indulgences of the commodity, a glorious sign of his real presence among the faithful. Reified man advertises the proof of his intimacy with the commodity. The fetishism of commodities reaches moments of fervent exaltation similar to the ecstasies of the convulsions and miracles of the old religious fetishism. The only use which remains here is the fundamental use of submission. The pseudo-need imposed by modern consumption clearly cannot be opposed by any genuine need or desire which is not itself shaped by society and its history. The abundant commodity stands for the total breach in the organic development of social needs. Its mechanical accumulation liberates unlimited artificiality, in the face of which living desire is helpless. The cumulative power of independent artificiality sows everywhere the falsification of social life. I'm going to reread that because it totally got by me. The pseudo-need imposed by modern consumption clearly cannot be opposed by any genuine need or desire which is not itself shaped by society and its history. The abundant commodity stands for the total breach in the organic development of social needs. Its mechanical accumulation liberates unlimited artificiality, in the face of which living desire is helpless. The cumulative power of independent artificiality sows everywhere the falsification of social life. In the image of the society happily unified by consumption, real division is only suspended until the next non-accomplishment in consumption. Every single product represents the hope for a dazzling shortcut to the promised land of total consumption and is ceremoniously presented as the decisive entity. But as with the diffusion of seemingly aristocratic first names carried by almost all individuals of the same age, the objects which promise unique powers can be recommended to the devotion of the masses only if they're produced in quantities large enough for mass consumption. A product acquires prestige when it is placed at the center of social life as the revealed mystery of the ultimate goal of production. But the object which was prestigious in the spectacle becomes vulgar as soon as it is taken home by its consumer and by all its other consumers. It reveals its essential poverty, which naturally comes to it from the misery of its production. Too late. But by then, another object already carries the justification of the system and demands to be acknowledged. The fraud of satisfaction exposes itself by being replaced, by following the change of products and of the general conditions of production. That which asserted its definitive excellence with perfect impudence nevertheless changes both in the diffuse and the concentrated spectacle, and it is the system alone which must continue. Stalin, as well as the outmoded commodity, are denounced precisely by those who imposed them. Every new lie of advertising is also an avowal of the previous lie. The fall of every figure with totalitarian power reveals the illusory community which had approved him unanimously, and which had been nothing more than an agglomeration of solitudes without illusions. What the spectacle offers as eternal is based on change and must change with its base. Spectacle is absolutely dogmatic and at the same time cannot really achieve any solid dogma. Nothing stops for the spectacle. Its condition is natural to it, yet completely opposed to its inclination. The unreal unity proclaimed by the spectacle masks the class division on which the real unity of the capitalist mode of production rests. What obliges the producers to participate in the construction of the world is also what separates them from it. What brings together men liberated from their local and national boundaries is also what pulls them apart. What requires a more profound rationality is also what nourishes the irrationality of hierarchic exploitation and repression. What creates the abstract power of society creates its concrete unfreedom. Part 4, the proletariat as subject and as representation. Quote, the equal right of all to the goods and joys of this world, the destruction of all authority, the negation of all moral restraint, there, if one goes to the heart of the matter, is the reason for the insurrection of March 18th and the charter of the formidable association which furnished it with an army, end of quote. Parliamentary inquest on the insurrection of March 18th. The real movement which suppresses existing conditions rules over society from the moment of the bourgeoisie's victory in the economy and visibly after the political translation of this victory. The development of productive forces shatters the old relations of production and all static order turns to dust. Whatever was absolute becomes historical. By being thrown into history, by having to participate in the labor and struggles which make up history, men find themselves obliged to view their relations in a clear manner. This history has no object distinct from what takes place within it, even though the last unconscious metaphysical vision of the historical epoch could look at the productive progression through which history has unfolded as the very object of history. The subject of history can be none other than the living producing himself, becoming master and possessor of his world, which is history, and existing as consciousness of his game. The class struggles of the long revolutionary epoch inaugurated by the rise of the bourgeoisie developed together with the thought of history, the dialectic, the thought which no longer stops to look for the meaning of what is, but rises to a knowledge of the dissolution of all that is, and in its movement dissolves all separation. Hegel no longer had to interpret the world, but the transformation of the world. By only interpreting the transformation, Hegel is only the philosophical completion of philosophy. He wants to understand a world which makes itself. This historical thought is as yet only the consciousness which always arrives too late, and which pronounces the justification after the fact. Thus, it has gone beyond separation only in thought. The paradox, which consists of making the meaning of all reality depend on its historical completion, and at the same time of revealing this meaning as it makes itself the completion of history, flows from the simple fact that the thinker of the bourgeois revolutions of the 17th and 18th centuries sought in his philosophy only a reconciliation with the results of these revolutions. Quote, even as a philosophy of the bourgeois revolution, it does not express the entire process of this revolution, but only its final conclusion. In this sense, it is not a philosophy of the revolution, but of the restoration, end of quote. Karl Korsch, Thesis on Hegel and Revolution. Hegel did for the last time the work of the philosopher, quote, the glorification of what exists, end of quote. But what existed for him could already be nothing less than the totality of historical movement. The external position of thought having in fact been preserved, it could be masked only by the identification of thought with an earlier project of spirit, absolute hero. The external position of thought having in fact been preserved, it could be masked only by the identification of thought with an earlier project of spirit, absolute hero who did what he wanted and wanted what he did, and whose accomplishment coincides with the present. Thus, philosophy, which dies in the thought of history, can now glorify its world only by renouncing it, since in order to speak, it must presuppose that this total history to which it has reduced everything is already complete, and that the only tribunal where the judgment of truth could be given is closed. When the proletariat demonstrates by its own existence through acts that this thought of history is not forgotten, the exposure of the conclusion is at the same time the confirmation of the method. The thought of history can be saved only by becoming practical thought, and the practice of the proletariat as a revolutionary class cannot be less than historical consciousness operating on the totality of its world. All the theoretical currents of the revolutionary workers' movement grew out of a critical confrontation with Hegelian thought, Stirner and Bakunin, as well as Marx. The inseparability of Marx's theory from the Hegelian method is itself inseparable from the revolutionary character of this theory, namely from its truth. This first relationship has been generally ignored, misunderstood, and even denounced as the weakness of what fallaciously became a Marxist doctrine. Bernstein, in his Evolutionary Socialism, A Criticism and Affirmation, perfectly reveals the connection between the dialectical method and historical partisanship. By deploring the unscientific forecasts of the 1847 Manifesto on the imminence of proletarian revolution in Germany, quote, this historical self-deception, so erroneous that any political visionary could hardly have improved on it, would be incomprehensible in a Marx, who at that time had already seriously studied economics, if we did not see in this the product of a relic of the antithetical Hegelian dialectic, from which Marx, no less than Engels, could never completely free himself. In those times of general effervescence, this was all the more fatal to him, end of quote.